actually kept you up there for another hour, I think, to go through some of those things. Let's have a little bit of silence now while our next speaker comes up to the podium. Many of you will know Syed Farid Alatas, who's now with the National University of Singapore, but who is more and more engaged with questions around education, decolonisation and higher education, specifically here in Malaysia, which is his home and his nation, I suppose. So Syed is going to speak. I don't even have your title in front of me, so you'll have to introduce your title, Farid. Ah, yes. Right. But it's about relevance. So Farid.
Assalamu alaikum and good morning to everyone. First of all, thank you very much to the organizers for the invitation. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to come from the beginning of the conference because I had a class to teach yesterday morning in Singapore, so I could only come last night. My title of my presentation, it's in the program, Relevant Knowledge, Conceptual Creativity, Subversion and Advocacy. What I want to talk about is what I understand by anti-Eurocentric or non-Eurocentric knowledge. Now before I discuss that, I want to say a few words about Eurocentrism. I want to say a few words about Eurocentrism. Basically, I think there is a distinction to be made between the old Eurocentrism, which began in medieval times when the Europeans came into contact with non-European people. And the old Eurocentrism is based on simple dichotomies, binary opposites. Europe or Christianity or the West stands for advance and progress. The non-West is backward. Christianity is true religion, other religions are fake religion or forms of heathenism, and so on and so forth. You have these binary opposites, and this was very much a part of Eurocentrism and Orientalist disciplines in the arts and humanities for centuries, well into the early part of the 20th century. The new Eurocentrism is a bit different in the sense that in much of the human sciences today, these binary opposites and these stereotypes about non-Western peoples or non-Western religions are no longer dominant. But the form of Eurocentrism today is that there is a neglect of non-Western ideas, concepts in the humanities and the social sciences. This, I think, is the dominant form of Eurocentrism. However, I would say that the old Eurocentrism is still found in popular culture. In that sense, in many other ways, popular culture is ahead of the humanities and social sciences. It's ahead of academics. But in this way, popular culture seems to be behind. Let me just give you an example. This is a random example which was suggested to me by the fact that the host is the University of Nottingham. So what better example to give than from Robin Hood? In 1991, I think, a movie, an American movie called Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves was made. Now, it has some very interesting Eurocentric and non-Eurocentric elements. The movie begins, this was a movie in which Kevin Costner acted as Robin Hood. The movie begins with the Azan and a dark jail in Jerusalem with very cruel captors and with hudud laws being applied. I think Robin Hood himself was under threat of his hand being chopped off. But at the same time, you have a very interesting character by the name of Azim, a Muslim, an Arab, played by the famous African-American actor Morgan Freeman, who was presented as, you know, a very civilized man, a chivalrous man, you know, with the qualities of chivalry, what the Arabs call futua, who was honorable. He was technologically savvy. For example, he had a portable telescope which he whipped out, which really amazed the Englishmen who were around him, you know, showing symbolizing the technological advancement of the Muslims in those days. So you have some interesting, you know, an interesting element of an attempt to be counter-Eurocentric, but overall the movie was Eurocentric because it still presented Azim as an exception to the Muslims, because Azim himself was escaping punishment, and in fact he was saved by Robin Hood, and therefore he decided to repay his debt to Robin Hood by accompanying him to England and helping him in his endeavors. So this is popular culture. Now, the new Eurocentrism, as I said, is a kind of Eurocentrism in which there is a neglect of the non-European or the non-Western in terms of ideas. I want to suggest 4 ways in which knowledge can be counter-Eurocentric or non-Eurocentric. The first way is that it needs to be epistemologically pluralistic. What I mean is this: in modern knowledge, particularly in the sciences, in the natural sciences, but also in the social sciences, our methodological approach is restricted to the so-called scientific method, to induction and deduction. Now this is at odds with the classical tradition, whether we're talking about the medieval Christian tradition or the classical Greek tradition or the classical Islamic tradition, in which the scientific method, induction and deduction, are merely, or what is collectively called demonstration, is merely one mode of argumentation. You have other modes of argumentation such as dialectics, rhetorics, and poetics, which were considered as valid means of arriving at knowledge, but these have been more or less expunged from the curriculum, unless you happen to be a philosophy student or perhaps a student of literature. But in the classical tradition, these are all valid forms of argumentation, valid forms of arriving at knowledge. I mean, just to give you an example, a sociologist or an economist may study inductively or deductively through you know, data collection and through application of theories, poverty in a village. An anthropologist may study poverty in a village using the scientific method. But a poet may describe the poverty in that village in a way that provides an understanding through experience that enables the reader of the poem to feel or experience the world of the people in poverty. An artist on oil on canvas may paint the scene of poverty in the village, and these are forms of knowledge that are as valid as the so-called scientific forms. And we find that in the works of historians and sociologists and anthropologists, indeed, we do find that there is usually a multiplicity or a plurality of methods that are being used. No matter how scientific we may claim to be in our writing as sociologists or historians, there is always the use of dialectical methods, and to a great extent the use of poetical and rhetorical methods. But these are never taught. So my point is that it is necessary to return to the classical tradition in order to be more pluralistic in terms of our methodology. Now that is one point. Because what has come with Eurocentrism and with our university system and our curriculum is the narrowing of our epistemological views and our methodological perspectives. Secondly, it is necessary for knowledge, in order to be non-Eurocentric, to be conceptually rooted in diverse traditions. Now this has to do with the fact that much of knowledge in the modern educational system is founded on concepts and theories that are derived from only one particular tradition. And I wouldn't even say Western tradition. I would say generally North American, British, and to some extent German and French tradition. But largely North American, largely Anglo-Saxon tradition. So the idea that traditions outside of these are not seen as sources of ideas, sources of concepts. The problem is a serious problem because many of the concepts that we use in the social sciences have a way of distorting our understanding of reality. I would just like to give a very simple example, the concept of religion. The concept of religion is an interesting concept. It derived from the Latin term religio. Religio was used to refer to Christianity for centuries, for more than 1500 years. Now in the 18th century, the 19th century, the term religion began to be used to refer to non-Western religions. But the problem is, when the term was used to refer to non-Western religions, the perspective was still based on the categories of Christianity. So for example, when people thought of Islam as a religion, when people thought of Hinduism as a religion, when they thought of Buddhism as a religion, they thought about these religions in terms of Christian categories such as church, sect, denomination, cult, etc. So there was a tendency to reconstruct, to interpret and reconstruct these religions through the lens of Christianity. So there is a distortion or a loss of reality. I don't really have time to go into the details of this. Religion, the concept of religion is just one example. In the case of India, this conceptual construction of Hinduism resulted in an actual empirical construction of Hinduism, because the British not only thought of Hinduism in this way, but actually colonized India and were able to build institutions which were based on their image of what Indian religions was, rather than how the Indians themselves had understood their religions for centuries. Now, apart from the fact that concepts may distort when applied from concepts that are derived from one particular tradition applied to another tradition, they may distort. Apart from that problem, we have to realize that we can't engage in knowledge production by ignoring the concepts that emerge from within our own traditions. It's simply, an unsound practice, because we have to realize that concepts that emerge from within our own tradition have some utility in terms of providing an understanding of what we are studying. And there are so many concepts in local tradition, indigenous tradition, which have been neglected. And they have been neglected because these concepts are not found in the standard textbooks in sociology, in anthropology, in psychology. These textbooks generally come from Britain and North America. In many of the social sciences, they come from Britain and North America. And if these ideas and if certain themes, certain topics, certain themes, certain concepts are not found in these textbooks, it means that we will not pay attention to those themes and those topics. So we imitate what is also absent in the curriculum. Just let me give an example of a theoretical resource which is extremely neglected. My own work on Ibn Khaldun. I published a couple of books on Ibn Khaldun, one of them on methodology, but the second book is really about an application of Ibn Khaldun to empirical historical cases. I have a chapter on the application of Ibn Khaldun to the rise of the Saudi Wahhabi state. I have a chapter on, a chapter on the application of Ibn Khaldun to the rise of the Safawi state, and so on and so forth. I mention this because it's interesting that Ibn Khaldun is, his works have been around for 600 years, but there have been very rarely attempts to use him as a conceptual resource. Scholars have looked at Ibn Khaldun as a source of information about North African history, but not as a conceptual resource. And this is where I think the great neglect is as far as Eurocentrism is concerned. I would also like to mention that as far as this need to be rooted, conceptually rooted in diverse traditions is concerned, there's not only the tradition of the high cultural tradition of our various civilizations that are sources of knowledge, but also the everyday life experiences of our local societies that are experiences of, that are sources that should be seen as sources of concepts. I was recently in Tehran, in Iran, conducting some methodology workshops in some university. One of the topics that was raised, which again comes from the local situation, from the local culture, is this phenomenon of hen-pecked husbands. You know what I mean by hen-pecked husbands? In Malaysia, I don't know how many, not many Malaysians here, but the Malays call it takut bini, right? In Persian, it is referred to as a phenomenon of zanzari, right? Now, it's a very interesting concept because it's a real phenomenon. This is a phenomenon whereby men feel intimidated and subservient to their wives. It's kind of the opposite from the opposite of male domination. But because this topic is not in the research agenda of the conventional sociology of the family or gender studies, you don't find it in the textbooks, and therefore it is not an important topic of research. But it's interesting that in Iran there is at least one anthropologist who has written a work and done empirical research on the phenomenon. I don't think we've done research on this in Malaysia, and in many societies we haven't done research on this. It's just an example of a topic which is locally generated, which results in creative work. Another topic that emerged in our discussions in Tehran, I suggested to the students, this was in Azhar University actually, that an interesting thing to study, see, we were talking about how do we come up with problems. How do we creatively come up with problems when we do research? And one idea which I suggested to the students is, what about the history of toilets? You see? The history of toilets. And then some of the students said, this is not an important topic. It is not a priority. There are far more important things to study, like oppression of women, corruption, underdevelopment, poverty. There are more important topics to study than the history of toilets. Now, I use the example of the history of toilets. It's fun. I use the example of the history of toilets in order to show that a seemingly trivial topic can actually reveal a lot about society. If we talk about the history and political economy, the history, design, the architecture, the building, and the maintenance of toilets in Malaysia. You know, we have terrible, as you all know, we have a terrible system of public toilets, right? Rather filthy, actually. If you look into the history of toilets, the politics of toilets, the administration of toilets, it will reveal a lot about political economy of the country. It will reveal something about bureaucratic corruption, because in Malaysia there is a great deal of corruption when it comes to development. It will reveal a lot about maladministration in terms of efficiency and accountability. So simply looking at this topic of the toilets will not only reveal to us something about Malaysian habits and customs and culture, but also it will be a case study of the political economy of development of this country. Just some simple examples. But you will not find anything about toilets in American textbooks or in British textbooks. So because these topics are absent in those textbooks, they are also absent in our curricula, because we are merely imitating curricula from the outside. Now, the third way in which social sciences can be non-Eurocentric is that they need to subvert commonly held ideas. They need to subvert commonly held ideas. And I would like to give an example which I think is a very serious issue as well. Now, one discipline that has emerged in the last 40 or 50 years, which presents itself as an alternative to mainstream economics, is Islamic economics. Islamic economics presents itself as an alternative to the kind of economics that is apologetic for capitalism, or the kind of economics that is apologetic for socialism or communism. But if we were to be critical in a creative manner, we would see that economics, Islamic economics, is not the alternative that it presents itself to be. And we would see that Islamic economics exists within the context of capitalism, and that the kinds of theories, its analysis of problems, and the policies that it generates, such as the Islamic banking system, are designed to fit within the global capitalist system. For example, the Islamic banking system fits perfectly within the international capitalist order and could not exist outside of that context. And in fact, a host of problems related to capitalism, such as the issue of exploitation, the issue of increasing disparities in income, and some basic problems of capitalism, have not been theoretically addressed by the discipline of Islamic economics. And if you look at practice, if you take Saudi Arabia, for example, now in Saudi Arabia, we are seeing the destruction of heritage. For example, the house of Sayyidah Khadija, the wife of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Her house has been destroyed in Makkah and leveled, and over that land, public toilets were built. Right? Now, what is very reprehensible is that there is no movement in the Muslim world against the destruction of heritage, the destruction of the graves of the Ahl al-Bayt, the graves of the Sahaba, the graves of the Awliya, the saints, and other historical sites. But what is interesting is when these historical sites, when this heritage is destroyed, what is put in their place? The icons of capitalism: hotels, shopping centers, shopping malls, car parking lots, and so on and so forth. So what you have is destruction of heritage, which goes hand in hand with capitalism. The destruction of heritage, of course, is done in the name of Islam, done in the name of a particular brand of Islam, a Salafi brand, because, for example, the idea, that Muslims should not go to graves, should not, perform visitation of graves, because this is result in the worship of the dead, and therefore the graves should be destroyed.